So in the Magna Carta, you can interpret one of the sayings as what is necessary is legal. Now that gives you a liberal stance on law, so that maybe if your partner happens to be having a heart attack, you can speed to get them to the hospital. Now, even though the Magna Carta has been repealed to an extent, it is still one of the cornerstones of law. But what about religion? Well, actually, many religions follow the same idea that being an upright citizen and following societal laws is part of being a good person, basically being moral. So that leads one question. What if murder is necessary? Does that make it legal? Does that make it free of sin? All of these things you might be wondering, why am I talking about on a video game channel? I'll tell you why. Because this is the first thing that kind of came to mind when I was playing Diofield. The further and further I got in the game, the further and further I kind of went questioning things. Number one, am I the good guy or the bad guy? You play as Andreas, who is an assassin of sorts, which typically not a good guy, but you're a mercenary. And the first time you meet Andreas and his two other cohorts is when they're saving somebody from some bandits. So you assume they're good. And, well, let's be honest, this is a video game and you play as Andreas. Typically, you are in fact the protagonist and not the villain of the story. But even completing the game, I still have a lot of questions about it. Now, a lot of people can have complaints about this game in general, and those are all fair. Gameplay is fun but easily cheesed. The characters, I think, is one of the big issues that I have in a game like this, where you start off with a small amount of characters and it's a tight-knit group and you really like them and you enjoy their interactions because there's a lot of banter. There is a lot of, hey, this young group of mercenaries, it's them against the world and everyone's trying to manipulate them, and they are. I mean, that's part of the game of being a mercenary. But you even expand your party just a little bit early on as the person that you were saving, Wadaquin, actually becomes a mage user for your team, and you happily accept her because, well, she adds depth to the team. And not too much later after that, you're hired to help drive back the Empire, and you're in fact offered another new party member, but he's an archer. You don't have that, and again, is someone you happily accept because that adds more depth. But this core group right here seems to be like the main group, and you do really start to care about them. But as you go on in the game, you collect more and more party members, and the core group becomes less and less relevant. I don't like how a lot of games do this. Fire Emblem is a good example of a game that does this, where even though your core group has been fighting all these fights and doing everything, they don't seem to level up as quick as the new people that you bring in. And if you want to actually just complete the game, you're gonna go ahead and just go with the new people. And yeah, that can easily be another complaint about this game. But the one thing that people cannot complain about is the story. The story is really good. In fact, it really first starts off as a battle of resources, as many different entities, from an empire to nobles to a council of nobles to even religious groups, are fighting over jade, because jade is something that kind of powers, well, their world in a lot of ways, and it definitely enhances magic ability. As the story goes on, as actually a king of this entire continent, and he's about to die. And of course, in this time, the siblings fight over who's going to have power. But there's only one true heir to the throne, and it is a person who has a mark on their hand. It's called the Blessed Mark. Well, none of them have it, because apparently that sibling died early on. So it turns into a civil war of sorts, as well as the Empire invading, and the whole continent basically just going to hell. And this is where you see Andreas, maybe more so than ever, be manipulative. Always have a plan. In fact, even though you're controlling him, you feel like Andreas knows more than you do. He's always ready for a plan, and a plan that usually works, but it always seems to have ulterior motives, and it happens to be that he sets it up so it always benefits him in a certain manner, but in turn it benefits his mercenaries as well. And we can kind of see this early on when he and his fellow mercenaries are funded by a noble. Well, quickly the noble kind of gets ousted in a manner of speaking, one that maybe Andreas himself had let some information slide. Well, nevertheless, Andreas is now in charge of the mercenary group, now known as the Blue Foxes, and he is subsequently in charge of all the funds that went into it. That's not where it stops. In fact, it goes further and further until Andreas pretty much controls as much as a king does, if not even more than that. And we start to understand where this comes from. See, Andreas is actually from the Empire. And late in the game, by the way, this is a spoiler, so anyone who cares about the game, this is another spoiler, but late in the game we find out that his parents were killed by essentially a general, the head of the Empire. And ever since then, he had to learn to do for his own. Basically, he had made promises to himself, that in which involved striking revenge against those who killed his parents, and also making sure that whoever had power next was worthy of the power. And that really does go deeper into some other things that we see with Andreas. As you can tell, I'm trying not to give all the spoilers away, but towards the end of the video, I definitely will. So I will let you know when I'm going to completely just kind of give up the story and some key parts to where this comes from. But that'll be later. First, I just want to go back into Andreas himself. And as a character, you're not really sure why he does what he does, but you do know that you get the feeling that he's the bad guy. Now, throughout the entire game, the big bad guy kind of changes. It's this person, now it's that person. It kind of reminds me of Final Fantasy Tactics in a way, where it's not until real late game that we learn who is the quote-unquote bad guy. But in this, that bad guy never really seems to resolve into anything. And I think that's why we question Andreas so much. It is very possible that many who've actually beaten the game would consider him the bad guy. And it hurts me to think that we're never going to probably see a Diofield Chronicles 2, just because I don't think the sales were that good. Now, I hope they were, but I don't know. And sometimes Square can kind of surprise us, and they'll continue on with the story that didn't sell that well, but I don't know. I have a feeling about this one not continuing. I could be wrong, but I will say that we'll never really find out the answer unless there is a sequel, because everything is kind of marred and jaded. Now, without a doubt, we can confirm that Andreas is, well, he's kind of an asshole, if I'm being honest. Like, he'll do certain things, like one of your first teammates is Izzy, and she's like your first tank, and what she does in a lot of ways really kind of speaks to who she is and how she's always trying to live up to her father's expectations of her. The first moment that you actually meet her father, instead of kind of guarding Izzy and being like, yeah, I get you, but Izzy's still awesome, we love Izzy. No, in fact, Andreas invites her father to join their ranks, almost like giving Izzy a little bit of a boost to keep trying harder instead of being comforting and securing as a friend would be. But no, that's not what he has in mind at all. And in fact, as the game player yourself, you end up knocking her out of your core group because she just doesn't hang with the levels like her father does. And he becomes a person that you use pretty much until the end of the game. At least most people, I think, will. But it's things like this that Andreas does throughout the entire game, where he's just kind of an asshole. And you kind of get that idea that he's only really about himself, or he's what's best for the entire continent. And that's where I'm saying that question of what is necessary is legal comes to my mind. Like, is he the villain? Is he the bad guy? Or is he the one who was trying to bring this whole continent back together and then hold it together? I don't know. It's very interesting because the way that he did things did work. But a lot of the things that he did were double-crossing people, were being manipulative, and honestly clawing and scratching his way to the top, which we all know is kind of part of real life. But at the same time, it's hard to say that that's somebody that we can endorse and somebody who's a true protagonist. And I think that's why I really appreciate the writing of this game, because that's not the way life works. There is no just hero who comes riding in and everyone gets behind them and everything is all solved and unified and, cheery, yay, yay. No. In fact, usually there's someone who is quite polarizing, and some people dislike, other people at least admire their ability to get things done. And that's where we have Andreas. He's right in that group of people who is definitely polarizing. In fact, there again, maybe even evil one. Maybe even the bad guy. It's hard to say. And at the same time, you have to ask yourself while playing this game, does anyone else in that group, and not just your core group of foxes, but no, the entire continent, does anyone else deserve power? Because they're all doing evil, messed up stuff too. In fact, that's your motivation for beating a lot of them, for taking control when you do, is because what they're doing is worse than what you're doing. Or at least you think so. You're not sure. And that's where there's just tons of questions. Because some of the intel we get is even based through Andreas. Now, is he being honest? I don't know. It's hard to say. Now, I think a majority of it is yes, but there is still some of those questions that come up. Is he just doing this to gain power? Is he creating this chaos so that he is able to get to where he needs to be? Now, I'm going to go ahead and give you some of the spoilers in the game. In fact, probably the biggest one. And if you're someone who wants to play the game, I get it. But if you're someone who doesn't want to waste the 70 hours I put into it, then I also understand and can stick along. But, if not, I appreciate you for joining me this long. Anyway, though, we find out a couple things about Andreas. And number one, the only person I think he cared about was Wadaquin. They had a very tumultuous relationship. There was love, hate, lust, and I don't know, weirdness that went on between them. Actually, to gain what he needed out of her and out of the situation, he ends up killing her. Now, he doesn't have to kill her, but let's be honest too, she turns evil. And her whole power was essentially raising the dead, so it's not like she was gonna be good, but you can tell that was the only thing that actually really hurt him. And the only thing that he thought about. And throughout the entire game, we actually see him changing as well as the other characters. And that growth is not a positive growth. Nobody actually becomes like somebody better. In fact, most of them become worse. And Frederick is one of those characters. You see, Frederick, who is like your best friend. It turns out that he is actually a prince. He was the one that they thought died, but he didn't. And he has the blessed mark to prove it. And early on in the game, in fact, I would say the first 70% of the game, he's a really good dude. And, cheerful and just, positive. And there is, this almost hero kind of person. But once he learns that he's king and he has the power, he becomes very dark. And very, I don't want to say corrupt with the power, but you can tell it's already going to his head. At the end of the game, when you do fight the leader of the Empire, the battle itself is an enjoyable one, but pretty quick, honestly. None of the battles or bosses actually get that intense. At least it didn't for me. There's a pretty easy way to kind of cheese the game, and I think the game calls for it in a lot of ways. They sort of just make that happen, because essentially, once you have Catherine or Izzy, and just have them do a shield wall, everybody and all the enemies get attracted to that shield wall, and they go after them. Well, Andreas is like a badass, and he just goes back and performs a bunch of awesome assassin moves, and the other ones can attack too, but all these attacks are ambushes, and so they do a lot more damage, and meanwhile, your tank doesn't take any damage while they're in the formation of shield wall, so you just kind of spam that and keep attacking and killing people. But the important part is once you've actually vanquished the leader of the Empire, you're then left with a decision, and you can see it in Andreas's eyes what decision he's already made, as he takes the gun and shoots Frederick. And the next thing we see is Andreas now at the head of the table, so to speak. But you have to wonder, was he being true to his convictions? You see, he said there again that those who are worthy shall wield power. But Frederick is already turning into somebody who was arguably kind of a megalomaniac. Somebody who was already getting off on their own power. Would that be Andreas as well then? I don't know. I would kind of think yes. And maybe that's what ultimately turns him into the evil person, is that he doesn't believe anyone else has the ability to hold the power. At the same time, we can also just admire the fact that maybe he just wanted stability. I mean, he's never had it. Ever since he was a child, he's been on the run. He's been trying to find some sort of stability, and even the country that he ended up growing up in is incredibly unstable. So maybe he just feels like he's given everyone else an opportunity, and they've all screwed it up. So the only chance for true stability is if he holds the power. And that's where the character itself has so much depth, and why I really do enjoy Diofield Chronicles, because this is just a part of it. And there's so much more into the story that kind of opens up. Now, to be honest, as I have played it, it does get kind of monotonous, and some of the missions just feel kind of regurgitated, and it's just the same battle system over and over, and it can get kind of tiring. And the thing I think that bothers me the most, aside from the fact that the gameplay is, well, like I said, easily cheesed, also, you early on get like the best equipment. I'd say like halfway through, at least for me, I unlocked the best daggers I could for Andreas, and unlocked pretty much everyone's best weapon. And every time that you complete a mission, or you finish a chapter, complete a certain side quest, you get a boost in your like unit ranking. And really early on there too, they start to mean nothing. And everything that you unlocked is already as much as you're going to ever unlock. And so this game really does land only with its story, which I think is really good, and without Andreas, it wouldn't be. But that still begs the question, is what he was doing right or wrong? And to be frank, there is no answer. Not one that I can think of anyway, but it's something that I wanted to talk about. After beating Diofield Chronicles, I just felt like this was a game I wanted to take a deeper dive into, to look into into the character that is Andreas and to understand that maybe, yes, he was and you are the bad guy in the game, but maybe with good reason. Maybe the only option is for you to be that person because the rest of the continent wasn't going to resolve anything and everyone's just as dirty, if not more corrupt and dirty than you are. So it might as well be somebody like you take control. And that is, unfortunately, real life. And I think that's what I like about the game, is it does mirror so much of reality. Even though this is a game with dragons and gigantic monsters, essentially zombies, but it does in fact, at least on a psychosocial level, represent humanity as it is in real life. But that's my thoughts on Diofield Chronicles. Very deep, long video, I get it. This wasn't really a review, it was just me talking about it. And something that I kind of want to do with a few games every now and then is to just go deep on them and just discuss different aspects of the game that really kind of caught my attention. And honestly, that's why I didn't go into gameplay too much or any individualized missions, just because, like I had said, there is reasons why this game isn't perfect. But the story itself, the character of Andreas, I think is definitely worth your time to just kind of explore and check it out. Now, obviously, if you've made it this far, you don't care about the story, or you've already beaten it, one of the two. And anyway, I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Anyone that is beat the game, not beat the game, whatever, just anything down below. If you have a game that's kind of like that, and you just want to throw that and bring it to my attention, I'd appreciate that too. But anyway, guys, I appreciate each and every one of you. Y'all have a great day. Take care.